There was one sacred vow that no one dared to break, not even the emperor himself. It was a vow of the Vestal Virgins, the chosen daughters of Rome's eternal flame. They were not ordinary women. They were the living embodiment of purity, guardians of the city's divine fire that was said to keep Rome alive. If the fire ever went out, Rome itself was doomed. If the Virgin ever broke her vow, she was doomed instead. For nearly 1,000 years, the Vestal Virgins walked through the streets untouchable, revered, almost divine, clothed in white, their heads veiled, their eyes cast aground. They moved like living prayers through the chaos of empire. They lived within the house of the Vestals, a sanctuary beside the Temple of Vesta, protected by the gods themselves. Or so it was believed. But behind those white veils, behind the sacred oaths and ceremonies, lay one of Rome's darkest punishments, a death so slow, so silent, that even the executioners claimed innocence. They did not kill her, they said. They merely buried her alive and let the gods decide. The story begins with a young girl named Aemilia. She was only 6 when the priest came for her, chosen from a noble family to serve the goddess Vesta. Her mother wept, but her father stood tall, for this was the highest honor a Roman family could ever receive. To have a daughter of Vesta was to be favored by the gods. Aemilia was taken to the Atrium Vesti, where her old life ended. She was trained in silence, duty, and obedience. She learned how to tend the sacred flame, how to offer grain and salt to the goddess, how to move through life untouched by desire or sin. She was told she would serve for 30 years, 10 in learning, 10 in service, 10 in teaching. After that, she could marry if she wished, but most never did. After 30 years of silence, the world outside no longer felt like home. For years, Aemilia kept the fire alive. Through storms and drought, through wars and triumphs, she rose each dawn to feed it with pure wood and prayer. But as Rome's glory grew, so too did its shadows. It was during the reign of Emperor Domitian, a man obsessed with purity and power, that whispers began to spread to the marble corridors of the temple. Someone had broken the vow. Someone had betrayed the goddess. The punishment for such a sin was ancient, older even than the empire itself. The law of Numa Pompilius, Rome's second king, declared that a Vestal who lost her chastity must die, but no man could shed her blood. To execute her by sword or fire was sacrilege. And so Rome devised another way. They would seal her underground, alive, with a flickering lamp, a loaf of bread, a jug of water, and milk, just enough to make it seem merciful. Then they would walk away and leave her to the gods. When Aemilia's name was whispered in the streets, few believed it. She had served faithfully for nearly 2 decades. But the rumors grew that she had been seen walking at night, that a shadow had entered the house of the Vestals. Some said a soldier. Others said a priest. No one knew the truth. Domitian knew only this. The people needed purity, and purity needed punishment. The day of judgment came like a storm. The streets of Rome filled with onlookers, their eyes hungry for spectacle. The sacred fire still burned, but the air was cold with dread. Aemilia stood before the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of Rome, her white veil heavy with dust. "Have you broken your vow?" he asked. She did not answer. Her voice was trapped somewhere between her chest and her heart. The silence was enough. The sentence was death, but not a death of flames or blades. No, the Romans were careful to keep their hands clean before the gods. So they built her tomb beneath the earth, near the Colline Gate, a small chamber lined with stone, with a couch, a lamp, and a few morsels of food. The entrance was narrow, enough for one person to descend. Once sealed, it would never open again. Aemilia was led to the city in a closed litter, unseen by the crowd. She could hear them, though, thousands of voices shouting, whispering, judging. Some cursed her name. Others pitied her, but none dared to help. She was taken to the field of punishment, the Campus Celeratus, the place of the wicked. There, the priest performed the last rites. The Pontifex Maximus lifted his hands and prayed aloud that if Aemilia was innocent, the gods themselves would save her. Then he turned away. No one could watch what came next. The steps down into the chamber were cold, cut deep into the ground. Aemilia walked slowly, her breath trembling in the torchlight. She looked back once, at the faint outline of the world she had once known. Then the stone door lowered, and the light began to fade. Above her, the priests covered the entrance with earth. The sound of shovels echoed like thunder in her ears. Soon, even that was gone. Silence. Only the faint hiss of her lamp and the pounding of her heart. In the darkness, she whispered prayers to Vesta, the goddess she had served since childhood. She begged for mercy, for a sign, for anything, but the flame did not answer. Hours passed, or maybe days. She could no longer tell. The lamp flickered. The air grew thin. Her throat burned with thirst, but she dared not drink. She wanted to save the water, to make it last. But what was the use of time when death had already found you? And yet, somewhere above, Rome carried on. The markets buzzed. The senators argued. The gods were praised. While beneath the earth, a girl lay forgotten, buried alive for a sin she may never have committed. They called it justice. They called it divine will. But to Aemilia, it was only silence, the silence of a world that worshipped purity more than mercy. As her final moments came, she did what she had always done. She whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for Rome, for the fire that still burned in the temple, for the city that would never know how much its purity had cost. And when the lamp finally went out, Rome did not notice. The flame of Vesta still burned brightly in the temple, tended by other virgins who dared not speak her name. The earth above her remained undisturbed, her tomb sealed forever. Aemilia had become a warning, a ghost bound to Rome's promise of perfection. For in the empire that claimed to be eternal, even the purest flame could be buried alive. The city of Rome woke the next morning bathed in gold. From the Palatine Hill, the emperor's statues gleamed beneath the rising sun, and the scent of baked bread drifted through the streets. The merchants shouted, the soldiers drilled, the senators plotted. Life, as always, continued. But beneath that life, beneath the clamor of the forum, beneath the roar of chariots, the ground still held its secret. A girl lay sealed away. Her breath turned to dust, her name forbidden to be spoken. Only the Vestals knew. Only they had seen the empty couch where Aemilia once slept, the cold corner of the atrium where her sandals still rested. And as they passed each other in the temple's halls, they lowered their eyes. The fire still burned, but its warmth felt thinner, weaker, as though even the goddess herself grieved in silence. Days turned into weeks, and Rome forgot her. That was the Roman way, to bury its shame beneath marble and call it virtue. But inside the house of the Vestals, the air was heavy. When night fell, the eldest of them, Domitia, would stare into the sacred flame for hours. The orange light flickered across her face like ghostly fingers, and in that flicker she swore she saw Aemilia's eyes, wide, pleading, fading into the dark. Domitia had served for 35 years. She had seen emperors rise and fall, seen temples crumble and laws rewritten. Yet the law of the Vestals had never changed. A virgin must remain pure, the priest said. Her purity is Rome's strength. But Domitia wondered, if Rome's strength demanded such cruelty, what did that say about Rome? She could not voice it. To question the right was to invite suspicion, and suspicion among the Vestals was death. So she kept her silence, as generations of women before her had done. Still, rumors swirled through the streets. Some claimed the earth above Aemilia's tomb cracked open one night, and a faint light escaped. Proof, they said, that the gods had taken her soul to Vesta's hearth. Others whispered that her ghost wandered near the Colline Gate, her white veil trailing through the dust, searching for the light that betrayed her. Rome fed on such whispers. It always had. Every cruelty needed a myth to make it sacred. Meanwhile, Domitian, the emperor who had ordered the execution, boasted that justice had been served. From his marble palace, he declared that Rome was purified once more, that the goddess was pleased. He ordered festivals, sacrifices, and the lighting of 1,000 lamps across the city. But power, like fire, needs fuel. And the more he ruled by fear, the hungrier that fire became. Soon, another accusation rose. Another Vestal. Her name was Cornelia, known for her quiet devotion. But she was also young, barely 20, and the emperor's enemies saw opportunity in her innocence. A jealous senator whispered that she had been seen speaking privately with a nobleman. No proof, No witness, just a whisper. But in Rome, a whisper could kill. Cornelia was summoned before the Pontifex Maximus. She trembled as the priests questioned her, their faces masks of stone. "Do you deny it?" they demanded. "Do you deny that you broke the goddess's vow?" "I am innocent," she cried. "Vesta knows my heart." Her words meant nothing. The ritual required bloodless death, not truth, and the people, weary from famine and fear, demanded a scapegoat. When she was led to the streets to the Campus Celeratus, some of the crowd wept, but many watched in silence. They had seen this before. They would see it again. Cornelia, unlike Aemilia, did not go quietly. At the mouth of the pit, she turned to the priests, her voice breaking. "If I am guilty, may Vesta take my life. But if I am innocent, may Rome remember what is done." Then she descended into the darkness, her words echoing off the stones. And as the entrance closed, a storm broke over the city. Thunder cracked across the sky. Lightning struck the temple's roof, and the sacred flame, for the first time in decades, flickered out. Panic rippled through Rome. The priests rushed to relight the fire, but the people murmured that the gods had spoken. The punishment meant to preserve Rome's purity had instead defiled it. Domitia, watching from the temple steps, felt her heart seize. She had tended that flame for half her life. She knew every dance of its smoke, every breath of its heat, and now it was gone. She knelt before the cold ashes, her hands trembling, and whispered, "Forgive us." That night she dreamed of Aemilia and Cornelia walking together beneath the earth, their hands bound by light, their faces serene. "The flame burns elsewhere," they told her. "Not in temples, but in hearts." When Domitia awoke, she understood. The purity Rome worshipped was not divine. It was human, and by burying its daughters alive, Rome was slowly burying its own soul. Yet empires are slow to learn. Over the next centuries, more Vestals would meet the same fate. The ritual never changed. The sealed chamber, the small lamp, the bread and milk, the solemn prayers that masked cruelty as faith. Each burial became both sacrifice and warning, and each left an invisible scar on the city's conscience. Historians would later call it justice. Priests would call it tradition. But those who lived it called it terror. The women of Rome watched their daughters taken at 6 years old, watched them grow into veiled symbols of the gods, and prayed they would never falter, because one mistake, one rumor, could turn holiness into a grave. By the 4th century, the empire began to crumble. Barbarians pressed against the borders. The treasury emptied, and new religions whispered of mercy instead of punishment. Christianity spread like quiet fire, and there came a new vision of purity, not enforced by death but by faith. When Emperor Theodosius finally abolished the old pagan rites, the temple of Vesta fell silent. The sacred flame was extinguished forever. The last Vestals left the atrium, their veils heavy with dust, their steps echoing through halls that once held the heartbeat of Rome. Domitia, now an old woman, returned one final time to the temple. The marble walls were cracked, ivy curling through the stones. She walked to the hearth where the eternal fire had once danced. Her hands traced the cold basin that had once glowed with light. For a moment, she thought she heard laughter, the soft voices of girls long gone. Aemilia, Cornelia, countless others whose names history had erased. She knelt and whispered, "It is over," but in her heart, she knew it wasn't. The world changes its gods, not its hunger for control. The story of the Vestals did not end with Rome's fall. It became legend, reshaped by poets, softened by scholars. They called the Vestals noble, brave, divine. They spoke of purity and devotion, of sacrifice for the good of the state. But the truth lingered in the shadows, that beneath the marble beauty of empire, women had been buried alive to feed an illusion of perfection. Centuries later, when archaeologists unearthed the ruins of the House of the Vestals, they found nothing of the buried ones. No bones, no relics, only silence. Yet that silence spoke louder than any relic could. It was the silence of breath stolen before its time, of prayers left unanswered, the silence of Rome's conscience. Historians debated the details, how often it happened, whether every story was true. Some argued the punishment was rare, a symbol more than a sentence. Others insisted the records were clear. But the number never mattered. One death by burial alive was enough to stain eternity. The cruelty had always been dressed in ceremony. The Pontifex Maximus would pray aloud that if the condemned were innocent, the gods would save her. Then he would turn away as the earth closed. He would claim his hands were clean. Rome always found ways to make its hands clean. And yet, in some way, the Vestals achieved what no army or emperor ever could. Their stories survived the empire. They became echoes in cathedrals, inspirations for saints, reminders that even the most powerful civilizations can mistake virtue for violence. Modern Rome stands above their graves, unaware of the dust that once trembled beneath its streets. Tourists walk the Via Sacra, snapping photos of broken columns and fallen statues, never knowing that beneath their feet once lay a girl, breathing her last in the name of purity. But if you stand there at dusk, when the shadows stretch long and the city hums softly, some say you can still feel it. The faint pulse of that buried flame, not of fire, but of memory, of defiance, because Aemilia's prayer did not die with her. It lived in the whispers of every woman who dared to question power. It lived in every voice that rose against injustice masked as piety. In the end, Rome fell not from invasion, but from exhaustion, the slow decay of a soul that had spent centuries worshiping its own perfection. The temples cracked, the statues crumbled, and the eternal city learned that eternity is not built on fear. And somewhere beneath layers of earth and empire, the ghosts of the Vestals rest, not as victims, but as witnesses. Their story remains a warning etched into history, that when purity becomes law, mercy becomes treason. Their punishment was meant to silence them forever. Instead, it made them immortal. As the centuries passed, poets wrote of them as tragic heroines. Artists painted them standing beside dim flames, their eyes turned toward heaven. Philosophers cited them as proof of Rome's discipline or its madness. But none captured the truth as it was. The terror of breathing in the dark, the sound of shovels above your head, the fading light of a lamp that would never reach the sky again. The punishment of the Vestal Virgins was more than execution. It was theater. It was a declaration to every Roman watching that the gods demanded perfection, even if perfection required burying innocents alive. And through that theater, Rome controlled not only its people, but their faith. When we look back now, it feels almost impossible to believe. A civilization so advanced, so proud, so obsessed with order, could invent such horror and call it holy. But that is the paradox of empire. The brighter its light, the darker its shadow. The Vestals lived within that shadow. They tended a fire that symbolized life, even as their own could be extinguished at a whisper. And yet, in their silence, they left something eternal. Their story still burns. It reminds us that faith without compassion is cruelty, that law without mercy is tyranny, and that the most powerful empires are not those that conquer the world, but those that learn from their ghosts. So the next time you walk the ruins of ancient Rome, pause by the Temple of Vesta. Close your eyes. Listen. You may hear nothing at all, only the faint hum of traffic and the chatter of tourists. But beneath that noise, beneath 2,000 years of dust, there is still the heartbeat of a buried flame, a flame that refused to die.